It's getting more and more negative headlines as the days go on, and rightly so.
And I was sitting at my desk in Treasury when this was announced, and I've worked in Treasury's tax area for part of my career, and I must confess, I thought this was an embarrassing mistake.
I think people are walking into the lines, and I think that they are now, well, they are going to be barbecued 1st July, 3 million plus.
It goes against every principle of Australia's tax system. Today at Even United, former head of the Reserve Bank Phil Lowe and the former Treasury Secretary Ken Henry both declaring it a terrible idea.
I can't believe that Jim Chalmers bought this, and I can't believe that Treasury didn't shoot it down, because we would have shot it down in the past. And you don't have to believe me, listen to Ken Henry.
Well, first thing that comes to mind with me, I mean, is probably lack of trust. And I say that because SGC came into the obligations for employers came in 1992. Keating brought that in. One of the best things, one of the better things that Paul Keating introduced. That and imputation franking, probably did more than most. And at the time, I remember the first year when SGC, I looked at it and I thought, this compulsive savings, and coming in from legal into the funds management space, this is going to be a big business. How far does it go? How is it regulated? And what are the choices out there? And I think the first year there was 350 to 400 million, and I thought, wow. And now we're looking in excess of 4 trillion. And why I say trust is because it was something that was the compulsive savings, putting Australians in a position where they had they were one day hopefully self-funded, and the initiative for government obviously was to remove a lot of the obligations from the government for social security, and people have adhered to that and have really bought into that since 1992, and you know, I remember years ago, early 90s, people would say, oh, superannuation, I'm not, high net worth clients, so superannuation, I don't know whether I trust that system. And I'd be promoting it from a tax perspective as an advisor, and as a lawyer, I'd say, well, you know, there's no better tax haven in this country than superannuation. The negatives are you can't touch it, you can't borrow against it and things like that. So all of this buy-in, then it's taken about, you know, really by 2005 to 2010, no one needed to be convinced. And I'm talking about people that were going to put $3,000 into super that, or had $5 million in super. And so everyone was educated on the notion that, or the facts that the tax at 15% on earnings, 10% on capital gains tax, 0 in allocated pension, was the best deal of going around as compulsive savings. So now the people that have done their, and a great analogy is someone who goes to school, is a good person, does the homework, goes to university, graduates, and becomes something of themselves, or makes something of themselves, gets rewarded, and they matriculate to the top. So now what we're doing is that with the superannuation system, we're penalising the people that have done that great work, studied, had their nose to the grindstone, employed people, a lot of them in business, or have just worked hard and removed the obligations for the government to pay them through the retirement phase, have become self-funded, and also help their children along the way too, now being penalised and taxed. And so I find that betrayal, and that's not being hard. I think that opposed to looking somewhere else for productivity and revenue for the government, they're now taxing the people that have done the hard work. It's almost like let's rip into the surgeons, the doctors, the lawyers, the engineers, the white-collar profession, and the business people, because they've done so well. Let's take from them without asking them. So that's how I think. Now, is it fair for people that have actually that don't have $3 million and the resources for the governments and all the infrastructure has to come from somewhere? This has been too easy. It's a low-hanging fruit. It's an easy target. Let's impose more land tax for the states, hit the people with real estate, attack capital gains tax, or unrealised gains in super, knowing that even if we hit the gain, it's still a great environment, and I bet you they don't leave super. So that's what we're dealing with, and I think that you know, what you'll see over time, I suspect, that people that do get close to or nudging towards 3 million, you'll see an exodus of superannuation. I mean, the ABS came out last week and said there's 81,000 people that'll be affected, but I think what it does is sends a signal of distrust to the younger generation, and for people getting into business, they'll look elsewhere, which is another discussion. And elsewhere I'm talking about avoiding super, discretionary trusts, family trust structures, and even to a level where offshore businesses. Two major things here. What you're seeing is, I know of over a dozen people that I know that are financially independent, and not 65, 70, I'm talking about in their late 40s, that have left Australia, and for that reason is land tax, corporate rate of tax, personal tax, and the superannuation for them doesn't work as well because they're property-based investments, and there's gearing, and so it doesn't work as well. But they've left. One in particular I spoke to, who was quite prominent in media up until about 3 years ago, Queenslander, and he said to me, the reason I've decided to leave, just on one of the investment trusts, I'm $300,000 a month in tax better off by relocating to Cyprus. And it's nowhere near the size of our portfolio, but it made me think, my goodness, he just had an epiphany some years back and decided that once he's sold down, and so he's decided to sell down the physical assets, pay the capital gains tax, and worked out he was better off. The cost of living was a third, the tax is a third, and you're on the Mediterranean with better weather, arguably with D&I, probably the best D&I rates in the world, living on the Mediterranean. The other acid test, of course, is when you're looking at appetite and why people are moving, for several reasons, and it's not the people that are moving that are 25, 35, 40 that are beginning their career. It's people that are established to really think, well, gee, if I fly, I can see family, I can come back and see them, and in 12 hours, 24 hours, I'm back in the country. But people are starting to think about things differently now. The second thing is that if you look at the IPO market, now the IPO market is also a great barometer of what's happening. Going back 15, 20 years ago, I mean, I was involved with doing I did a third of JB Hi-Fi as a claim to fame many years ago at a little office in Whitehorse Road, Box Hill. And back then I remember there was 4 or 5 floats, 8 floats a year, IPOs, where people are getting excited about such and such, they'd be putting their money together to go and get on the IPO. Telstra 1, Telstra 2, Telstra 3, All of these different floats that were coming. Well, now you don't see any floats. You don't hear of any floats. I mean, CSL wasn't an initial IPO. I mean, that was a Sigma roll up there and takeover. So that's a merge. It's not an IPO. Right now, there's nothing of significance that's happened this year, and nor will it happen between now and Christmas of significance. But the reason why IPOs aren't as popular, because people have figured out, well, why would I go to the headaches I've got akin to real estate to go to IPO, the compliance obligations and the monthly reporting? It turns out I can make a few phone calls from my accountant to my accountant, and they've got private equity that will give me the same money at 500 times the speed, and I haven't got all these obligations. So that's what's happening in the world today. IPO, to go and raise 50 million, 100 million, 200 million, there's that much private equity around. And then if you're at the stage where you're larger than that, the US can't. I know of people that have talked about IPO for the last 4 or 5 years and given them phone numbers, literally sent text phone numbers of contacts in New York, and they couldn't thank me enough. They've raised the money by a US firm that took them through 8 weeks of DD, and they got their $300 million. So that's what's happening, and the government want to be very, very careful. Superannuation IPOs, raising money, and real estate, and they're putting all these barriers in there, and I think it's removing the incentive. I think people are walking into the lion's den. I think that they are now, they are going to be barbecued 1st July, 3 million plus. And I think that people are starting to think about the alternatives. I'm not for a moment advocating that super's dead. I'm just saying is that they've started to look at the areas, the least path of resistance for raising capital, and I think it's a major concern. But that's what I'm saying.